The Zeraphim had never known war. Their voices shook as they sent one final plea into the void, a desperate SOS, a cry for salvation. Across the stars, on a world forged in fire and survival, humanity heard that call. And when Deathworlders answer, they do not come with mercy. They come with fleets, with fury, and with firepower enough to shake the galaxy itself. The desperate signal, the message came through the void like a dying breath, weak and trembling across 40 light-years of empty space. Captain Sarah Chen sat in the command chair of the patrol ship Thunder, her weathered hands gripping the armrests as the alien transmission filled the bridge with sounds no human had ever heard before. Musical notes mixed with what sounded like wind chimes, creating a language that spoke of beauty even in desperation. Lieutenant Marcus Webb worked at the communications console, his fingers dancing across holographic displays as the ship's translation matrix processed the signal. The young officer had seen many things during his 5 years in the Earth Defense Force, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. First contact with an alien civilization, and they were begging for help. The translation appeared on the main screen, and Sarah read the words aloud to her crew of 40. The bridge fell silent as the message revealed its terrible truth. The Zeraphim Collective, a peaceful alliance of 12 species, was facing extinction. A plague they called the Devourers had swept through their space like wildfire, consuming entire worlds in weeks. Not a military force or natural disaster, but something far worse. Creatures that existed only to feed, multiply, and spread. Sarah studied the star charts that accompanied the transmission. The Zeraphim controlled a region of space larger than humanity's entire sphere of influence, yet they were losing ground daily. Red zones marked infected systems, and the pattern was clear. The plague was spreading exponentially, and at its current rate it would reach human space within 2 years. Commander Diana Ross, the ship's tactical officer, analyzed the data with growing concern. The infected zones showed no signs of life, no energy signatures, nothing but dead worlds stripped of everything organic. Whatever these devourers were, they left nothing behind but barren rock and empty oceans. The Zeraphim had tried everything, in their power to stop the spread, but their peaceful nature had left them unprepared for such devastation. The alien message continued, painting a picture of civilizations that had evolved without conflict, species that had never known war or violence. They were artists, philosophers, and scientists who had achieved faster-than-light travel through cooperation rather than competition. Now they faced an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with, and couldn't be stopped by their advanced but non-military technology. Sarah made her decision quickly. The Thunder might be just a patrol ship, but it carried quantum communication equipment that could reach Earth instantly. She ordered Webb to prepare a priority message for Earth Command, including all the data they had received. This wasn't just about helping aliens in need. If the Devourers weren't stopped, humanity would eventually face them alone. The response from Earth came faster than expected. Within an hour, Sarah found herself in a virtual conference with the highest levels of Earth's military command. General Harrison Blake, a veteran of the Mars colony wars, led the emergency session. Around him sat admirals, generals, and scientists who would decide humanity's response to this crisis. The debate was surprisingly short. Humanity had spent centuries fighting itself, developing weapons and tactics that other species would consider barbaric. But that violent history had also taught them the value of unity against common threats. The vote was unanimous. Earth would answer the call for help, not just with a token force, but with everything they could muster. General Blake outlined the plan with military precision. Operation Shield Wall would be humanity's largest military deployment in history. 300 warships, 50,000 Marines, and support vessels carrying supplies for extended campaign. The industrial might of 3 planets and dozens of space stations would shift to war production immediately. Dr. Elena Vargas, Earth's leading xenobiologist, raised an important point during the briefing. The Zeraphim database had classified humans as Deathworlders, a term for species that evolved on extraordinarily dangerous planets. Earth's gravity was crushing by galactic standards, its weather violent and unpredictable, its ecosystem filled with predators and diseases that would kill most aliens instantly. Humans had evolved, not despite these challenges, but because of them. This classification meant something significant. While other species had developed in harmony with their environments, humans had fought for every inch of progress. They understood warfare not as an abstract concept, but as a fundamental part of existence. The very traits that made humans seem barbaric to peaceful species might be the galaxy's only hope against the Devourers. Sarah received new orders before the conference ended. The Thunder would proceed immediately to the border of Zeraphim space, serving as humanity's official first contact vessel. They would gather intelligence, establish communication protocols, and prepare for the arrival of the main fleet. It was a dangerous mission, but someone had to be the tip of the spear. As the Thunder's engines powered up for the jump to hyperspace, Sarah addressed her crew. They were about to make history, not as conquerors or explorers, but as protectors. Zeraphim had asked the universe for warriors, and the universe had answered with humanity. The children of Earth, forged in the fires of a dangerous world, would stand between peaceful civilizations and extinction. The ship entered hyperspace with a flash of light, carrying 40 humans toward a war that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Behind them, Earth mobilized for battle with the efficiency of a species that had been preparing for this moment throughout its entire evolution. The Deathworlders were coming, and they brought with them something the Devourers had never encountered before: organized resistance from a species that knew how to fight and win against impossible odds. The gathering storm. The Zeraphim ambassador arrived on Earth 3 days after the Thunder departed, traveling in a ship that looked more like a work of art than a spacecraft. Ambassador Silex emerged from the crystalline vessel with movements that seemed to flow like water, her pale blue skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her emotions. She stood 7 feet tall but seemed fragile, with large eyes that held depths of intelligence and sorrow. General Blake met her at the landing platform of Earth Command, surrounded by an honor guard that tried not to stare at their first alien visitor. Silex's forearms moved in what the translation systems identified as a gesture of profound gratitude. Her voice, when she spoke through the translator, carried harmonics that human ears could barely process, creating an effect that was hauntingly beautiful. The briefing room had been modified to accommodate the ambassador's unique physiology. The gravity had been reduced to 40% of Earth normal, and the atmosphere had been adjusted to include trace elements her species required. Even with these modifications, Silex struggled with what humans considered comfortable conditions. Earth's gravity, even reduced, was crushing to her hollow bones. The dry air made her skin crack despite constant moisture treatments. Through days of intensive meetings, Silex painted a picture of the Zeraphim collective that both amazed and saddened the human command staff. 12 species living in perfect harmony, sharing resources freely, advancing together through cooperation rather than competition. They had eliminated hunger, disease, and want from their societies centuries ago. Their cities were living forests that grew rather than being built. Their technology worked in harmony with nature rather than dominating it. Colonel James Mitchell, head of strategic planning, struggled to understand their military capabilities, or rather their complete lack thereof. The Zeraphim had no concept of weapons beyond tools for mining or construction. Their ships had shields to protect against cosmic radiation, but no armor designed to withstand attack. They had never needed such things because they had never encountered hostile species until the Devourers came. The discussion turned to the nature of the enemy, and Silex's bioluminescent pattern shifted to deep purples and reds, colors of fear and revulsion. The Devourers weren't a species in any traditional sense. They were a biological weapon that had escaped control, or perhaps evolved naturally in some distant corner of the galaxy. They existed only to consume organic matter and reproduce, spreading from world to world like a cancer. Individual Devourers were small, no larger than a human fist, but they numbered in the trillions. They could survive in the vacuum of space, hibernate for decades without food, and adapt to almost any environment. When they found a world with life, they descended like a plague, consuming everything from the largest animals to the smallest microbes. They left behind only bare rock and poisoned oceans, worlds so thoroughly stripped of life that they could never recover. Dr. Vargas studied the biological data with growing alarm. The devourers reproduced through binary fission, each individual, capable of becoming two within hours if food was available. Their genetic structure was unlike anything in Earth's databases, suggesting either ancient origin or artificial creation. They showed signs of collective intelligence, coordinating attacks with frightening efficiency despite having no apparent communication methods. The War Council expanded as humanity's response grew. Ships arrived from Mars and the asteroid colonies, bringing veterans of humanity's colonial conflicts. The moon bases activated dormant weapons platforms that had been built during the last Great War. Private military corporations offered their services, seeing opportunity in humanity's first interstellar conflict. Admiral Rebecca Stone took command of the assembling fleet, a woman who had earned her rank through 30 years of service and 3 major conflicts. She studied the tactical situation with the cold precision of a surgeon planning a complex operation. The Devourers had no ships, no technology, no weapons in the traditional sense. They were purely biological, spreading from world to world through methods that weren't fully understood. The challenge was unprecedented. How do you fight an enemy that numbers in the trillions, that can survive in space, that consumes everything organic? Traditional weapons would kill thousands, millions even, but against such numbers, it would be like trying to stop the ocean with bullets. They needed something more, a strategy that attacked the Devourer's reproduction cycle or food supply. Scientists worked around the clock developing new weapons. Biological weapons were considered, but rejected as too dangerous. Who knew how such weapons might affect the Zeraphim or other alien species? Instead, they focused on energy weapons that could sterilize large areas, and delivery systems that could cover entire continents with cleansing fire. The mobilization of Earth's industry was a sight that awed even Silex, who came from civilizations far more advanced. Within days, entire cities converted to war production. Factories that had built consumer goods now produced ammunition. Shipyards that had constructed cargo vessels now assembled warships. The transformation was violent, aggressive, and completely alien to the Zeraphim way of thinking. Silex watched humans train for combat and struggled to understand what she was seeing. Soldiers practiced killing with an efficiency that horrified and fascinated her. They moved in coordinated units, each member knowing exactly where their teammates would be. They communicated through subtle gestures and practiced violence with the dedication of artists perfecting their craft. During one observation session, Silex asked Admiral Stone why humans were so proficient at warfare. The Admiral's answer was simple but profound. Every human child grew up playing games of conflict and competition. Their sports were mock battles, their entertainment filled with stories of heroes defeating enemies. They studied history that was written in blood, learned from wars that had shaped their civilization. Violence wasn't just part of human nature, it was the forge that had created them. The fleet grew daily as ships arrived from across human space, battle cruisers bristling with weapons, carriers loaded with fighters, support ships carrying supplies for a long campaign. Each vessel was a testament to humanity's evolution as warriors, designed not for beauty or harmony but for one purpose: winning wars. As the departure date approached, humanity did something that surprised even themselves. They opened their recruitment to volunteers from Earth's civilian population. Millions applied, willing to leave everything behind to fight for strangers they had never met. It was a reminder that beneath humanity's violent nature lay something noble, a willingness to stand for others, to be the shield between the innocent and the dark. First contact, first blood. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zeraphim territory like a thunderclap announcing a storm. 300 ships spread across the void in perfect battle formation, their hulls gleaming with reflected starlight. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship Vengeance, watching as her tactical display populated with data from the surrounding systems. The border world of Kalex Prime sprawled before them, a planet that had once held 3 billion Zeraphim, but now showed only faint life signs concentrated in underground shelters. The surface was crawling with devourers, visible from orbit as dark masses that moved across continents like living shadows. The planet's once green forests were gone, replaced by bare earth and growing pools of organic sludge where the devourers processed their consumption. Captain Marcus Rodriguez led the first strike team, 1,200 Marines in advanced combat armor designed specifically for this threat. Their suits were sealed against biological contamination, equipped with flame weapons and energy shields. They dropped through the atmosphere in armored pods, streaking through the sky like falling stars toward the largest concentration of survivors. The landing zone was a vision from nightmares. Devourers carpeted the ground in a writhing mass of gray-black bodies, each no larger than a human thumb but moving together like a single organism. They flowed over obstacles, through cracks, into every space where organic matter might hide. The air was thick with spores they released, turning the atmosphere into a toxic soup that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Rodriguez's boots hit the ground first, his suit's weapons immediately opening fire. Streams of superheated plasma carved through the devourer mass, creating temporary clear zones that filled again within seconds. His Marines formed a defensive circle, their weapons creating a ring of fire that held the swarm at bay. The noise was overwhelming, not from the weapons but from the devourers themselves, a chittering sound like a billion insects feeding. The Zeraphim survivors were huddled in a reinforced structure that was failing under the devourers' assault. The creatures were literally eating through the walls, their acidic secretions dissolving metal and concrete alike. Rodriguez could see Zeraphim inside, pressing against windows, their bioluminescent skin flashing in patterns of terror. Among them were young ones, smaller and more delicate, clinging to their parents with all four arms. Lieutenant Ashley Kim led a breakthrough team, using concentrated Huoyan throwers to carve a path through the swarm. The devourers recoiled from the fire but didn't flee, instead climbing over their burning kin to continue the attack. It took continuous streams of flame to create even a temporary corridor, and the Marines had to move fast before it closed again. Rescue was brutal in its efficiency. Marines grabbed Zeraphim survivors and literally threw them into evacuation pods, not having time for gentle handling. The aliens were fragile by human standards, their hollow bones cracking under rough treatment, but it was better than being consumed alive. One Marine, Private Jensen, carried 3 Zeraphim children in his arms, his suit's strength allowing him to move despite their combined weight. Above the planet, the fleet engaged in a different kind of battle. Devourer spores filled the upper atmosphere, trying to reach the ships in orbit. Point defense systems worked overtime, burning millions of the creatures before they could make contact with hull metal. One destroyer, the Athens, suffered a breach when spores found a weakness in its armor. The ship had to be quarantined immediately, its crew fighting a desperate battle to prevent internal contamination. Admiral Stone coordinated the evacuation with cold precision, rotating ships through the danger zone to maximize survivor recovery while minimizing exposure. She had studied every historical evacuation in human history, from Dunkirk to the Martian colony crisis, and applied those lessons here. Ships descended just long enough to collect pods before returning to safe distance, while others provided covering fire. The Zeraphim survivors were unlike anything the humans had expected. They didn't panic or fight for positions on the escape pods. Instead, they organized themselves with eerie efficiency, the youngest and most vulnerable boarding first, while adults formed protective circles. Their bioluminescent communication allowed them to coordinate without words, creating patterns of light that rippled through crowds like waves. Dr. Chen Wang, the fleet's chief medical officer, struggled to treat Zeraphim injuries with equipment designed for humans. Their biology was silicon-based rather than carbon, their blood a crystalline fluid that hardened when exposed to oxygen. Traditional bandages were useless, drugs designed for humans potentially lethal. His team had to innovate on the spot, using industrial sealants to close wounds and modified life support systems to maintain proper atmosphere. The ground battle intensified as more devourers emerged from underground tunnels they had carved through the planet's crust. Rodriguez realized with horror that the planet was already lost. The Devourers had consumed so much that Kalex Prime's ecosystem was beyond recovery. They were fighting not to save the world, but to save whatever lives they could before it died, completely. A breakthrough came when Corporal Lisa Park discovered that concentrated sonic weapons could disrupt the Devourers' coordination. At specific frequencies, the creatures lost their swarm cohesion, becoming confused and attacking each other. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it bought precious time for evacuation efforts. The fighting continued for 18 hours straight. Marines rotated through combat zones as their suits ran low on power or ammunition. The Zeraphim survivors kept coming, emerging from hiding places the humans would never have thought to check. Some had been underground for weeks, surviving on emergency rations while listening to their world die above them. By the time Admiral Stone ordered the withdrawal, they had rescued 40,000 Zeraphim from Kalex Prime. It seemed like a victory, until she learned the planet's original population had been 3 billion. The math was crushing. They had saved barely a fraction of a percent, and there were dozens of worlds suffering the same fate. As the fleet departed Kalex Prime, they left behind a surprise for the Devourers. Nuclear mines powerful enough to crack continents, set to detonate once the ships reached safe distance. It wouldn't stop the Devourers, but it would slow their spread from this world. The explosions were visible from hyperspace, brief flowers of light that marked humanity's first battle against the swarm. The Alliance forms. The rescued Zeraphim were distributed across the human fleet, their presence transforming the cold military vessels into something unprecedented. Admiral Stone watched from her command deck as humans and aliens worked together, for the first time in history, learning to communicate not through words but through shared purpose. The universal translator helped, but it was the simple acts of kindness that bridged the gap between species. Private Michael Thompson shared his rations with a Zeraphim child whose name translated roughly to morning song. The young alien's skin flickered with patterns of curiosity as Thompson showed her how to eat human food, both of them laughing when she tried chocolate for the first time, and her entire body lit up like a Christmas tree. These moments, small and personal, were building something larger than military alliance. The news of humanity's rescue mission spread through Zeraphim space faster than the fleet could travel. Other species within the collective, ones who had been preparing to accept extinction, suddenly found hope. The Korthax, silicon-based beings who lived in the void between stars, sent their fastest ships to rendezvous with the human fleet. The Melody, creatures of living sound who existed partially in another dimension, offered their unique detection abilities to track devourer movements. Within a week, the human fleet had grown into something unprecedented, a multi-species armada united against a common threat. The integration wasn't without challenges. The Korthax ships operated at temperatures that would freeze human blood instantly. The Melody's communication method could shatter glass and burst eardrums if not properly modulated. Yet somehow, they made it work. Captain Rodriguez, promoted to colonel for his actions on Kalex Prime, led the effort to create mixed-species combat units. The Zeraphim, despite their peaceful nature, possessed incredible computational abilities. Their minds could process battlefield data faster than any human computer, predicting devourer movement patterns with uncanny accuracy. They couldn't fight, but they could tell others exactly where and when to strike. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Silex, the Zeraphim ambassador, had been studying human military history with the dedication of a scholar preparing for the most important exam of their life. She discovered something that humans had taken for granted: the concept of combined arms warfare. Different species, like different military units, could complement each other's strengths and cover weaknesses. A new battle doctrine emerged from this revelation. Humans provided the violent striking power, the willingness to engage in brutal close combat. The Zeraphim offered strategic coordination and predictive analysis. The Korthax, immune to biological contamination, could operate in devourer-infested zones where others couldn't survive. The Melody Scouts could detect devourer concentrations through dimensions the swarm couldn't access. The first test of this new alliance came at the Nexus Point, a collection of 3 star systems that served as a bottleneck between infected and clean space. If the devourers broke through here, They would have access to dozens of populated worlds with no natural barriers to slow their spread. Admiral Stone committed the entire Alliance fleet to holding this line. The battle plan was ambitious beyond anything attempted before. The Korthax would enter the infected systems first, their ships immune to the biological attacks that would cripple others. They would map devourer concentrations and relay that information to the Zeraphim command ship, where hundreds of their kind would process the data in real time. The human fleet would then execute precision strikes based on Zeraphim calculations, hitting critical points where devourer reproduction was highest. The melody would monitor from their dimensional phase, alerting the fleet to any unexpected movements or reinforcements. It was warfare as symphony, each species playing their part in perfect coordination. The Devourers had never faced organized resistance on this scale. Their usual tactic of overwhelming through sheer numbers met calculated firepower directed with surgical precision. Human weapons carved through swarm concentrations, while Korthax ships corralled them into kill zones. Zeraphim predictions allowed the fleet to be exactly where they needed to be, sometimes arriving at threatened positions before the Devourers themselves. Colonel Rodriguez led the marine assault on an infected moon that served as a Devourer breeding ground. The surface was covered in organic structures that looked like massive hives, pulsing with the movement of billions of creatures inside. His mixed species team included Korthax warriors, whose crystalline bodies could withstand the acidic environment, and Zeraphim technical specialists who could identify critical weak points in the hive structures. The fighting was unlike anything in human military experience. The Devourers didn't just attack, they adapted. Within hours of the battle starting, new variants appeared with thicker shells that could withstand standard weapons fire. Others developed wings, taking the battle to 3 dimensions. Some even showed signs of explosive capability, sacrificing themselves to breach marine defensive lines. Lieutenant Kim discovered the solution almost by accident. While defending a Zeraphim technical team, she noticed that the Devourers avoided certain areas where Korthax blood had been spilled. Analysis revealed that the silicon-based fluid was toxic to the swarm, causing a chain reaction that could destroy thousands of creatures from a single contamination point. This discovery changed everything. Korthax volunteers offered their blood for weaponization, an act that went against every instinct of their species, but which they did willingly to protect others. Human weapons were modified to deliver Korthax blood in aerosol form, creating clouds of death that the Devourers couldn't adapt to quickly enough. The battle for Nexus Point raged for 6 days. Entire moons were sterilized, their surfaces turned to glass by nuclear fire. 3 human ships were lost when Devourers managed to breach their hulls, the crews fighting to the last to prevent the infection from spreading. The Zeraphim command ship nearly fell when a new type of Devourer, one that could survive in vacuum indefinitely, attached to its hull in millions. But the line held. For the first time since the plague began, the Devourers were stopped cold. They had lost trillions of their number and, more importantly, several of their primary breeding sites. The Alliance had proven that the swarm could be fought, could be beaten, with the right combination of courage, strategy, and cooperation. Defar. Victory came at a terrible cost. 8,000 humans died in the battle along with tens of thousands of Alliance members, but they had bought something precious: time. Time to develop better weapons, time to evacuate threatened worlds, time to find a permanent solution to the Devourer threat. As the fleet regrouped after the battle, a ceremony was held that would be remembered in galactic history. Representatives of each species gathered on the human flagship, where Admiral Stone and Ambassador Silex signed the first formal treaty between humanity and alien civilizations. The Galactic Defense Alliance was born, with humanity as its military spearhead and the other species providing support according to their abilities. Into the darkness, the Alliance fleet pushed deeper into infected space, entering regions where no ship had returned from in months. The void itself seemed hostile here, filled with clouds of devourer spores that reduced visibility and corroded sensors. Ships moved in tight formation, their point defense systems creating overlapping fields of fire that turned space around them into a killing field for any devourer that got too close. Admiral Stone studied the tactical displays with growing unease. They were approaching what intelligence suggested was the origin point of the plague, a system designated only as the Dark in Zeraphim star charts. No one knew what they would find there, only that every Devourer expansion could be traced back to this single location. The reconnaissance data came from unlikely heroes, a team of Melody scouts who had phased into parallel dimensions to observe, without being detected. What they reported defied understanding. The Dark contained something that shouldn't exist, a structure that was part biological, part mechanical, and wholly alien to anything in known space. It was the size of a small planet, pulsing with energy that registered on no known spectrum. Colonel Rodriguez prepared his Marines for what might be their final mission. They would have to board this structure, find whatever was controlling or creating the Devourers, and destroy it. The mission parameters were simple in concept, but seemingly impossible in execution. They would be dropping into the heart of enemy territory with no guarantee of extraction. The Zeraphim had provided something crucial for the mission, a map of the structure's interior based on mathematical modeling of its energy signatures. Their minds could perceive patterns that no human or computer could detect, creating a three-dimensional blueprint of something that existed partially outside normal space. It showed corridors that folded back on themselves, chambers that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, and a core that pulsed with life. Dr. Vargas had developed new weapons specifically for this mission. Bombs that didn't just explode but created temporary tears in space-time. Weapons that could theoretically destroy something that existed in multiple dimensions. They were untested, dangerous, and violated several treaties that Earth had signed, back when their biggest concern was other humans. The approach to the Dark was a nightmare of coordination. Devourer numbers here were beyond counting, clouds of them so thick they blocked out stars. The Korthax ships went first, their hulls poisonous, to the swarm, creating temporary corridors through the biological clouds. Human ships followed, weapons firing continuously to keep the path clear. The structure itself was a horror to behold. It looked organic, like something that had grown rather than been built, but with geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Surfaces that should be solid flowed like liquid, and spaces that appeared empty were filled with something that the mind refused to process. Several crew members had to be sedated after looking at it too long, their minds unable to cope with the wrongness of what they were seeing. Rodriguez's assault team consisted of 500 humans, 100 Korthax warriors, and 20 Zeraphim, technical specialists. They launched from the fleet in specially modified pods designed to penetrate the structure's organic hull. The journey through the Devourer clouds was the longest 2 minutes of their lives, pods spinning and shaking as creatures impacted against their hulls. The interior of the structure was worse than the exterior. Walls that breathed, floors that tried to digest anything that touched them, and air that was toxic to every known form of life. The Marines' suits began failing within minutes, systems corrupted by something in the atmosphere that seemed to attack technology itself. They pushed forward through corridors that changed shape as they moved, following the Zeraphim map that updated in real time as the structure shifted. Combat here was different from anything they had trained for. Devourers emerged from walls, from ceilings, from spaces that hadn't existed seconds before. Some were massive, evolved forms they hadn't seen before, with capabilities that defied biological science. Private Jennifer Walsh was the first to see the core. She described it later as looking at the birth of a universe and its death simultaneously. It was a sphere of writhing energy that contained billions of devourers in various stages of development. But more than that, it was aware. When the team approached, they could feel its attention turn to them, a pressure in their minds that made several Marines collapse. The Zeraphim specialists worked frantically to understand what they were seeing. Their bioluminescent communication created a light show of rapid information exchange, patterns so complex that the universal translator couldn't keep up. Finally, Specialist Siren spoke in halting English, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. The structure wasn't creating devourers. It was a devourer, the first one, the template from which all others had spawned. It was billions of years old, possibly older than some galaxies, a remnant of a universe that had existed. Before this one, It had survived the death and rebirth of reality itself, and now it was trying to convert all matter in this universe into versions of itself. Rodriguez made the command decision that would haunt him forever. He ordered the deployment of Dr. Vargas's dimensional weapons, even though they were still inside the structure. The bombs would likely kill them all, but it was the only chance to destroy something that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Korthax warriors volunteered to carry the bombs deeper into the structure while the rest of the team retreated. Their crystalline bodies could withstand the dimensional tears longer than organic life, giving them precious seconds to place the weapons at critical points. It was a suicide mission, and every one of them knew it. The retreat was a fighting withdrawal of the kind that would be studied in military academies for generations. Marines held positions just long enough for others to fall back, then retreated themselves. Zeraphim specialists guided them through the shifting corridors, predicting changes before they happened. They lost 100 soldiers in the first 5 minutes, overwhelmed by devourers, or lost when corridors suddenly ceased to exist. The bombs detonated when they were barely clear of the structure. Reality itself seemed to scream as dimensional tears ripped through space-time. The structure began collapsing in ways that normal physics couldn't describe, folding in on itself while simultaneously exploding outward. The devourers connected to it died by the trillions, their shared consciousness severed from its source. But the victory came at a terrible price. The dimensional tiers didn't close properly, creating anomalies in space that would make this region impassable for centuries. Worse, the death of the Prime Devourer sent a psychic scream through space that killed every Zeraphim within a light year, their sensitive minds unable to withstand the mental onslaught. Of the assault team, only 200 made it back to the fleet. Rodriguez himself was carried out unconscious, his suit so damaged that he was technically dead for 3 minutes before medical teams revived him. The Korthax warriors who had carried the bombs were gone, their sacrifice ensuring that the weapons reached their targets. The final stand. The death of the Prime Devourer had an unexpected consequence that nobody had anticipated. Every remaining Devourer in the galaxy went into a frenzy, their behavior changing from organized consumption to chaotic destruction. They no longer worked together as a swarm, but attacked everything, including each other, in a desperate attempt to evolve into a new prime organism. Admiral Stone recognized both the opportunity and the danger in this chaos. The Devourers were more vulnerable now, their lack of coordination making them easier to destroy in detail. But they were also more unpredictable, spreading in random directions rather than following logical patterns of expansion. Worlds that had been safe were suddenly under threat, while heavily infested systems saw the Devourers turn on themselves. The Alliance fleet split into task forces, each racing to protect different sectors. The humans took the most dangerous assignments, their warships diving into infested systems where other species couldn't survive. The battle for the galaxy had become a race against time, to destroy the Devourers before one of them successfully evolved into a new prime. On the planet Thessia, home to the Melody, the situation was desperate. Billions of Devourers had descended from space, and the Melody's phase-shifting abilities offered little protection against such numbers. Colonel Rodriguez, still recovering from his injuries, led a relief force of 3,000 Marines and 50 warships. They arrived to find the planet's surface covered in a writhing mass of gray-black bodies 20 feet deep in some places. The solution came from an unlikely alliance between human aggression and Zeraphim creativity. The Zeraphim suggested using the planet's own magnetic field as a weapon, reversing its polarity in rapid succession to create an electromagnetic pulse that would disrupt the Devourer's neural functions. Human engineers made it happen, turning an entire planet into a weapon. The battle for Thessia lasted 4 days. Marines fought in rotating shifts, holding defensive lines while civilians evacuated to orbital platforms. The reversed magnetic field killed millions of Devourers but also played havoc with electronic systems, forcing soldiers to fight with mechanical weapons and basic equipment. It was warfare stripped down to its most primitive, humans with flame units against an organic tide. Lieutenant Kim, now promoted to major for her discoveries, led a strike team to destroy what scouts had identified as an evolution node, where Thousands of devourers were merging into something larger. The thing they found defied description, a mountain of flesh and teeth that was slowly developing intelligence. Kim's team used thermite charges to burn it from the inside out, the screams it made as it died audible from orbit. Meanwhile, news came from Earth that changed everything. Dr. Vargas and his team had made a breakthrough. By studying the remains of the Prime Devourer, they had discovered its fundamental weakness. The creatures were essentially a single organism spread across trillions of bodies, connected by quantum entanglement at the subatomic level. If they could disrupt that connection completely, every devourer would die simultaneously. The solution required something humanity had sworn never to build again: a quantum cascade bomb, a weapon so dangerous it had been banned after nearly destroying Mars during the colonial wars. It would create a cascade effect through quantum space, severing the connections between all devourers instantly. The problem was it needed to be detonated at a specific point in space where quantum entanglement was strongest. That point was in the heart of the most heavily infested system in the galaxy, where an estimated 50 trillion devourers were gathering. The Zeraphim calculations suggested this was where a new prime would emerge within days. The Alliance had one chance to end the war, but it would require the entire fleet working together in perfect coordination. Admiral Stone assembled every available ship for what historians would later call the Battle of the Void. 400 human vessels, 200 Korthax ships, 50 Melody phasecraft, and dozens of other species vessels gathered at the edge of the infected system. It was the largest fleet action in galactic history, and everyone knew that many of them wouldn't survive. The plan was elegantly simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. The fleet would punch through to the center of the system, deploy the quantum cascade bomb, and hold position long enough for it to charge and detonate. The charging process would take 10 minutes, during which the bomb would emit energy signatures that would attract every devourer in the system. The assault began with the Korthax ships forming a spearhead, their poisonous hulls creating a path through the initial devourer clouds. Human battleships followed, their weapons creating expanding spheres of destruction. The Melody scouts phase-shifted ahead, providing real-time intelligence on devourer movements and concentrations. The fighting was beyond anything previously experienced. Space itself seemed to be made of devourers, so many that ships were literally pushing through them like submarines through water. Point defense systems overheated and failed, forcing crews to use manual weapons. Some ships rammed through devourer clouds at full speed, their hulls glowing from friction. Halfway to the target, they encountered something new. The devourers had formed themselves into massive collective entities, beings the size of asteroids that attacked with coordinated precision. One such entity engulfed the destroyer Moscow, dissolving it in seconds. Another grabbed the Korthax flagship with tendrils made of billions of individual devourers, tearing it apart despite its toxic hull. Colonel Rodriguez led a desperate boarding action to clear devourers from the hull of the carrier Prometheus, which carried the quantum bomb. His Marines fought in vacuum, their suits' limited air supplies adding another layer of urgency to the battle. They used mining charges to blast devourers off the hull in chunks, creating temporary clear zones that filled again within seconds. The Zeraphim command ship, protected in the center of the formation, coordinated the battle with inhuman precision. Ambassador Silex herself led the effort, her mind linked with hundreds of her species in a collective consciousness that could process the entire battlefield simultaneously. Their predictions kept the fleet from being overwhelmed, directing ships to where they were needed seconds before disasters could occur. With 2 minutes remaining on the bomb's charging cycle, disaster struck. A superentity, formed from nearly 1 trillion devourers, emerged from the system's sun where it had been hiding. It was already showing signs of intelligence, directing other devourers with purpose rather than instinct. This was the emerging prime, and it understood the threat the bomb represented. Admiral Stone made the command decision that would define her legacy. She ordered all ships to converge on the superentity, to buy time at any cost. The Vengeance led the charge, ramming into the creature at full speed. The impact destroyed the ship's front half, but it lodged deep in the entity's mass, its self-destruct creating a wound that other ships could exploit. The final minute was chaos incarnate. Ships died by the dozen, overwhelmed by devourers or destroyed attacking the super entity. Individual acts of heroism became commonplace. The Melody Ship Harmony Song phase shifted inside the entity to detonate its core. A Korthax warrior named Krex held a breach in the bomber's hull with his own body, his toxic blood keeping devourers at bay. The quantum cascade bomb detonated with a flash that could be seen from neighboring systems. The effect propagated through quantum space at faster than light speed, reaching every devourer in the galaxy simultaneously. They didn't die violently. They simply stopped, their connection to the collective severed, their individual cells no longer able to function without the whole. Across the galaxy on hundreds of worlds, trillions of devourers fell like rain. The organic mass would take years to clean up, but the threat was over. The super entity collapsed in on itself, its nascent consciousness dying before it could fully form. The plague that had threatened all life in the galaxy was ended in a single moment of coordinated sacrifice. A new dawn. The aftermath of the Devourer War changed the galaxy forever. On Earth, the victory celebrations lasted for weeks, but they were tempered by the enormous cost. 40,000 humans had died in the conflict, along with hundreds of thousands of Alliance members. Every family had someone to mourn. Every community had heroes to remember. The cleanup effort was massive in scale. Dead devourers covered hundreds of worlds, their bodies creating environmental disasters that would take decades to resolve. Human terraforming technology, developed for making Mars habitable, was repurposed to restore infected worlds. It was slow work, but it was work that brought species together in common purpose. Colonel Rodriguez, promoted to general for his actions during the war, led the effort to establish permanent human bases in former Zeraphim territory. These weren't military occupations but partnerships, with humans providing defense while other species rebuilt their civilizations. The base on Kalex Prime, the first world they had tried to save, became a symbol of this cooperation. The Zeraphim, decimated by the psychic backlash of the Prime Devourer's death, numbered less than 1 million from a population that had once been in the billions. They faced extinction, but humanity and the other Alliance species refused to let that happen. Medical technology was shared freely, breeding programs were established, and their culture was preserved in vast digital archives. Ambassador Silex, who had survived the war despite the losses to her people, worked with Admiral Stone to establish the Galactic Defense Force. It was more than a military alliance. It was a commitment by all species to stand together against future threats. Humanity would provide the military backbone, but every species would contribute according to their abilities. The integration of human and alien technology proceeded rapidly. Zeraphim computational abilities combined with human engineering created ships that could think and adapt. Korthax materials science produced armor that was both toxic to biological threats and nearly indestructible. Melody phase technology gave humanity access to dimensions they hadn't known existed. On Earth, the social changes were equally profound. First contact had been through war, but peace brought cultural exchange. Zeraphim artists created works that human eyes could barely process but which touched souls in ways that transcended species. Korthax philosophers engaged human thinkers in debates about the nature of existence from a silicon-based perspective. Dr. Vargas, who had developed the weapons that ended the war, turned his attention to healing. The biological data gathered from the Devourers, terrible as they were, contained insights into cellular regeneration and adaptation. Within a year, his team had developed treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Major Kim established the first mixed-species military academy on Mars. Young beings from dozens of worlds came to learn not just human tactics, but the art of interspecies cooperation. The academy's motto, written in every known language, was simple: "Together we stand." The memorial for the war's victims was built at the nexus point, where the Alliance had first proved the Devourers could be beaten. It was a structure that existed partially in normal space and partially in the dimensions the Melody accessed, allowing every species to perceive it in their own way. The names of the fallen were inscribed in light itself, visible from light years away. General Rodriguez stood at the memorial's dedication ceremony, looking out at the crowd of humans and aliens who had gathered. His speech was broadcast across the galaxy, translated into 100 languages. He spoke of sacrifice and courage, of the moment when strangers became allies, and allies became family. The Korthax, who had lost so many in the final battle, presented humanity with a gift that moved even the most hardened veterans to tears. They had grown a crystal formation that contained the memories of every Korthax who had died in the war, allowing their thoughts and experiences to be preserved forever. It was their way of saying that sacrifice should never be forgotten. The melody composed a song that could only be heard by experiencing it across multiple dimensions. It told the story of the war from every perspective simultaneously, a harmony of triumph and loss that became the Alliance's anthem. When it played, every species could hear their part in the greater whole. 1 year after the war's end, a discovery was made that changed everything again. A survey ship found evidence of other galaxies suffering similar plagues, other prime, devourers threatening other civilizations. The Alliance had won their war, but the universe held countless other threats. The question was no longer whether they would fight again, but when. Admiral Stone, now Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Force, addressed the combined fleets at their first anniversary review. Behind her stood ships from every Alliance species, their different designs and technologies creating a display of diversity and unity. She spoke of the future, of the challenges ahead, and of humanity's new role in the galaxy. Humanity had answered the call when peaceful species faced extinction. They had brought violence to a war that required it, tactics to a situation that demanded them, and sacrifice to a cause that deserved it. They were no longer just humans from Earth. They were the guardians of a galactic civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. The Zeraphim had been right in their classification. Humans were Deathworlders, evolved on a planet that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years. But that evolution had given them something precious: the ability to stand between the innocent and the dark, to be the shield when others could only be the protected. As the fleet dispersed to their assigned sectors, each ship carrying mixed crews of different species, a new age began. It was an age where humanity's violent past became the foundation for a peaceful future, where the warriors of Earth stood watch so that artists, philosophers, and dreamers of 100 worlds could pursue their visions without fear. The children born after the war would grow up in a galaxy where humans and aliens worked side by side, where the differences between species were celebrated rather than feared. They would learn about the Devourer War in school, about the time when the galaxy faced extinction and the Deathworlders answered the call. In the end, humanity had found its purpose among the stars. Not as conquerors or explorers, but as protectors. They were the species that other species called when nightmares became real, when the darkness threatened to consume the light. They were the thin line between civilization and chaos, and they stood that line with pride. The story of the Devourer War would be told for generations, each species adding their own perspective to the narrative. But they all agreed on one point. When the galaxy sent out a desperate plea for help, when peaceful civilizations faced extinction, Earth's warships had answered. The Deathworlders had come, and with them came hope. As General Rodriguez returned to Earth after the memorial ceremony, he found his daughter waiting at the spaceport. She had been born during the war, had never known a galaxy without aliens. To her, the Zeraphim teacher at her school was as normal as the human one. She asked him if there would be more wars, if humanity would have to fight again. He looked at her, at this child who represented humanity's future among the stars, and told her the truth. There would always be threats, always be those who would harm the innocent, but there would also always be those willing to stand against them. Humanity had evolved on a death world, had survived everything the universe threw at them, and they would use that strength to protect others. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and terrors in equal measure, but it was no longer dark and empty. For humanity, they had found their place, their purpose, and their family among the stars. The Deathworlders had become the guardians, and the galaxy was safer for it.